Sloppy Spoilers with your host, DT2. What's up, y'all? DT2 Comics Chat here. Tonight, we're going to talk about Shogun Episode 2, A Tale of Two Masters. This episode could also be titled A New Can of Worms because a whole bunch of stuff comes out as this episode unfolds. This is a very intricate and complex, multifaceted type of plot and show. And so you really need some kind of background to kind of get the full grasp of what's going on. You need some historical background on the times, and you need either need to read the book or watch the earlier series to kind of understand the players and their different motivations. But a lot more things became clear in this episode. So we're going to dive in and talk about that. Want to give a welcome to my co-host, David Nemesis Howard.
Hey, what's going on? Thanks for having me on here. I'm excited to talk about this. We have a little action to talk about in this one as well, so I think that's going to be cool to talk about. I have watched ahead just because I'm a huge Shogun fan, as people could have picked up on from last episode. I picked up on what they're putting down here on how they are doing stuff, and I got to change the background in a second, which I will do. But I think there's a method to their madness. If we get there tonight, I'll talk about it a little bit. If not, I'm sure it's going to come up in future episodes. But I'm really looking forward to talking about this episode. It's starting to build. We're starting to get the intrigue building. So
cool. Welcome to Steve, Shaveling Sellers.
Life is good, and not so much though if you're an Englishman rotting in a Japanese prison, which is what a lot of what goes on with Blackthorn. But things do get better for him, and we will talk about that.
All right. Welcome to Jeff and Mr. Happy Bracey.
Hey there. I thought we were talking about episode 1, so I haven't watched episode 2. So I'll be talking out of my ass, trying as best I can from memory from the old show and the book series.
Well, he said that to the old woman. I forgot her name. She's like, "You're just as uncontrollable as always." He's like, "Yeah, like your butt, right?" But anyway, so
as long as you're not pillowing out your ass, you're fine. So
Mm-hmm.
So this episode, as I said, could
be bread left undefined at this point.
Could be retitled "A New Can of Worms" because you get a greater sense of the different type of motivations of the factions involved, because we have multiple factions and they're basically trying to realize their vision for Japan. But what unfolds in this episode is the camera pulls back and you get to see a little bit bigger picture. And so I thought it was better. You still need to read up on what's going on, but I'm going to go around and we'll get first impressions, at least from Nims and Shadewing, since Jeff hasn't seen it. But my first impressions was I understood a lot better why Blackthorn is such a key player in the eyes of many. I understood a lot better why they're adamant about their views about him because of what he represents and what he could represent in terms of what he's bringing to the table in terms of artillery and armament, but also a chance to open up new trade beyond Portugal. And what's funny to me, funny in the ironic sense, is how they keep trying to couch it as if it's about faith, as if it's about Catholics versus Protestants, but it's really about resources. It's really about power. It's really about, and they actually did it, but it was also symbolism. It's really about drawing a map of the world that looks like what you want it to look like. And so I just find that ironic that they keep, calling everybody else a barbarian and a heathen, which sounds awful familiar because that's always the way religion seems to pan out, but they're really just trying to get their own agenda established. So Nims and then Steve, give me your overall impressions of the episode.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it in our behind the scenes chat that, as I'm watching these episodes, I like I've said, I begin to pick up what they're putting down. I understand why they're cutting stuff, why they're adding new stuff on. And I'm a little frustrated. One of the things we're going to talk about here is his time in prison. That's completely truncated. I mean, there are, I think, a couple chapters of the book where he spends in prison and he learns a lot of stuff from that priest. And while he's there for part of this episode, he's kind of in and out. But I understand why they did it, because they're adding in a lot of conversations and twists and plots that you never hear about in the book. You find out about them way towards the end of the book, and they didn't want you like not knowing what was going on without a narrator in this series. And so they're presenting you with, like, for instance, there's a conversation between the Christian lords and the Portuguese where they decide to do something to Blackthorn. That never takes place in the book, ever. It's implied, but it never takes place. So I get what they're doing. And so while it's significantly different in the book, from a writing perspective, this is fascinating because they have adapted it for this medium and they've made some decisions. And while they may not have been the decisions that I would have done, I understand them and I'm approving of them. They're good. So.
All right, Steve, what were your impressions?
Well, firstly, I will talk about the priest for just 1 second, because I realized who it was. And they did a very good job of hiding his identity. That is Joaquin de Almeida, who some people might know better as Bucho from Desperado. So whenever I hear this priest talk, and this is how I knew the voice, I'm like, where do I know this guy from? And then I was thinking, what is the number to the phone in my car? So that's him. Yeah. So,
what's interesting about that priest? I don't know if you all picked it up, but he's a Dominican. And the reason he's in jail is because the Jesuits don't want the Dominicans honing in on their territory. So,
yeah. And I will say that Almeida usually plays villains a lot. And so he's playing somebody who actually is much more morally virtuous. Like, he is really trying to uphold his faith in a legitimate way. And he genuinely helps Blackthorn throughout the whole way. So seeing Almeida in that kind of a role was really interesting. Beyond that, I was talking last week about how the factions in Japan are basically like four wolves and a sheep trying to decide what's for dinner. It actually goes a little bit beyond that. And it's like you have House Atreides, and then you have House Harkonnen, House Lannister, and a couple of houses that are just about as bad in different ways. And I just find it very much kind of plays out like that. And here you have this guy who is upsetting the apple cart for everybody. And you have everybody scrambling to try to take advantage of the situation or end him, before he can really mess anything up. But the thing is, just by being there, he is already affecting the internal political situation in Japan. And that is very, very interesting. And it's kind of really interesting to see the responses to it. Like, who wants him dead versus who wants to use him versus who wants to actually give him a seat at the table.
Interestingly, Nim, that point you just made, like, you get that from the very first episode, though, when they have the Portuguese priest and he starts calling him a pirate. Is like, you need to kill him right now, because he understands it's the same sort of thing. We don't want this opposing empire crowding us out of this good thing that we got going. And this, of course, a period in history where political power is hand in hand with religious power in a lot of these states.
Yeah, one of the things I find fascinating about this book, and they are capturing it so far, is that this book is really the history of Catholicism, and I'm Catholic, and a lot of the history of Catholicism is pure power politics. And it wasn't just power politics between nations, it was power politics between different orders in Catholicism. The Dominicans hated the Jesuits because Dominicans believe in poverty and the Jesuits believe in making that cash. So it's just layer upon layer upon layer of stuff going on. And I think Lavelle was masterful in the way he took real history and mixed it, because one of the huge non-Christian faiths to this day in Japan is Catholicism. So
Toranaga seems like he can't win. It seems like he's getting it from all sides. It seems like if he takes power, that's going to give his enemies an excuse to unite and destroy him. And if he refuses power, they've already decided to destroy him anyway. So I find that interesting. I always like it when a protagonist is written in a difficult situation and they either have to fight their way out or think their way out, or normally have to do both. That's why I like Batman so much. So it's reminding me of a situation like that where, and the thing about it is because of tradition and because of respect and honor, it's like we both bow and respect you to your face, but we also hate you to your face and hate you behind your back. My favorite character is Mariko.
Yes.
She's always like, throwing shade, man, throwing shade just like right in your face. And I'm like, oh, dang.
No,
And she's also the only one that understands everything that's being spoken. Her and the priest translator. And so
Malvino. Yep.
She always knows what's going on, no matter what situation she's in. And I'm like, do they realize that? You keep bringing her in to translate because you want accurate translations. I understand not wanting to be deceived, and I understand not fully trusting the priest. But I'm like, do you get that she gets everything that's happening?
She's very quiet when she first gets introduced as the translator. She's asked if she speaks Portuguese. She's like, only as a student. So she's already downplaying herself because she's going to use that to her advantage.
Yeah, but keep in mind also, they're not going to trust women at this time. Like, they're not going to give her much respect, especially like in 16th century, Portugal. I don't think that, that they would have done that. So they're underestimating her, which I find interesting.
That's the most important thing, is that I've seen this online, and this is something I really want to talk about tonight, is that I've seen some people on both sides of whatever you want to call it, the political divide, attacking the show for different reasons. But one of the arguments I heard was, oh, this is woke because women have power here and women do this and women do that. I was like, this is in the book, and this was in Japan. Women in Japan had power. It was a different kind of power, but they had power, and they were trained.
And there were samurai, and there were samurai women. Yeah, Tomoe Gozen for one.
What's unfortunate is we are in the decade of the girl boss, and what people who have not been watching Chambara, Japanese samurai films since I was like 7 years old, and have come to know and love the culture, they don't understand the place that women played, the power that they did wield. And in fact, even if a woman was not a samurai, which was a rare thing, a woman of a house was expected to defend the house. And one of the things I saw the trailers is I see her defending with a naginata, and that was the woman's traditional weapon for defending her household. So bravo on getting those details right.
Not only that, we talked about it last episode. Women were also in charge of basically running their man's fiefdom. So even though the man was the lord, she was the head of the household. She ran the finances. She ran all of that and was expected to know how to do that because that wasn't men's work. Well, take that for what it's worth. But that's a huge thing. So,
and I was going to say, it makes sense that, one of them would turn out to be a ninja as well, because there were often, women that were definitely used, that would infiltrate them and were trained ninja. And so it makes sense that, the person who's trying to kill Blackthorn in the end, this is a woman in the household.
I mean, that's why the Hollywood idea of the shinobi versus the reality of it. The shinobi meant like garden spies. And the thing that you don't want is your spy / assassin / scout to be so easily identified. That you wanted the most unobtrusive, like not a second glance kind of person you could get out there. What good is your spy or your killer if you that guy looks like a spy or a killer over there. We should probably off them first.
And they explain in the book. Sorry to interrupt, but they explain in the book that these assassins, this one clan of ninja, they're trained their whole life for one job. They only ever do one job. If they fail it, they kill themselves. So this maid was in that household for 15 years, 20 years before she was activated. I mean, how can you defend against that? So
sleeper agent for decades. That's how they worked with the Kunoichi.
And that's not hyperbole. That is coming from classical tales of what ninja actually did. Again, we stepping away from the Hollywood idea, and you can really see the research that Claval did when he was writing his novel, and they've done in terms of the show as well.
Well, one thing I can't ever understand, even though all great wars and regimes and leaders have had it, but it seems like people don't understand the snake in the garden strategy. It's literally the oldest strategy in the world, quite literally. And so I'm like, every well, good leader or a good general, whatever, has infiltrators. Even Terminators have infiltrators. They have people that know how to get on the inside of what they're trying to do. And then if they're a sleeper agent, then you won't know that they're there gathering intel. You don't know that they're called to strike until they strike.
And what makes this more dangerous is the Japanese have a culture of reverence of death. You do the job unto death. So that makes them, the deadliest infiltrators ever. If my whole life has been geared towards being in this one place for this one time until I am activated, I'm not worried about getting out. I'm there to kill whoever they tell me I'm there to kill. And if I get out, great. But if I don't, I've done my job, and I'm going off to my reward.
Well, you can't do much with someone that's not afraid to die, and you can't do much with someone that's prepared to die in the execution of their duties. So speaking of that, if I didn't know the story, because Nim said that eventually Blackthorn learns Japanese, if I didn't know that ahead of time, because I'm kind of experiencing this as we go, I would have thought they would have taken Blackthorn out in prison. He thought he was going to die. I thought he was going to die too. I'm like, you're not making it out here, dude. So I was surprised.
He keeps mouthing off around a bunch of people who've got swords, and he sees the whack a peasant's head off for insolence.
Right. So I'm like, I don't even understand how you made out of the first episode until I understood what you represent to the different factions that are working from. I'm like, okay, I get it while they tolerate you because you've done nothing but insult people from the jump. Every time you open your mouth, that's what you're doing, is insulting somebody new. Thinking that they're beneath you. I'm like, dude, you realize you're in chains in their jail, right? But anyway, so I thought he was going to buy it in jail, and he did too. And as I'm listening to the conversation with the priest and all that, but apparently more people have different plans for him, which is what saves his life. Not his own ingenuity, not his own finesse, because he doesn't have any, not his own charm, just that you represent keys to new doors. That's why I said it's a new can of worms for a bunch of different people. And you're much more of a means to an end, but you're an important means to an end. And so they want to keep you around and see who can get the most out of you. And the reason I can understand that so much is because you see it in just about every system. But there are some systems that deny that's what they're doing. But if there's a golden boy or a golden child, then they're the key to what the people that control them are trying to do. And they put them out there in front of you on purpose because they're hoping that you will open up the new avenues they're trying to get to. And that's what Blackthorn represents. So I'm kind of glad he didn't buy it, even though I don't like him at all. But he's important. Go ahead, Nims.
I was going to say they're doing a good job showing that this guy is a man of action who is used to having his own life in his own hands, whether it be on the ocean or the decisions he makes to leave England to be a pilot, all of this stuff. And yet here he is a plaything of greater people. Yeah. He's a pawn. He's maybe even lower than a pawn. He's just an obstacle being moved around by people whose objectives he can't even begin to comprehend at this moment. How frustrating must that be for this guy? So,
I will say this actor made me think Diet Viggo Mortensen, and particularly the line from Lord of the Rings. It's like if he were a villain, he would sound fairer and seem fouler, because that's exactly what he is. I don't think he's really capable of being anything but a blunt instrument. So he keeps going what we call peak Cirrus on everybody.
This guy's playing checkers and everybody around him's playing chess. He's way out of his depth.
Yeah,
and
I will say, chess master and a very good one.
Having watched the 80s miniseries, they're doing a much better job. I forget, it was Richard Chamberlain played Blackthorn.
Yeah.
Richard Chamberlain was much too charming and much too suave and much too self-assured and everything else in that miniseries. And it's a good miniseries, don't get me wrong. But I think that what they've done with Blackthorn here is great. And I love what DT said about, I don't really like this guy right now because you almost want to call him a barbarian the way he's acting sometimes. So.
Yeah, it's so funny because I love seeing the cultures each calling each other barbarian. But when you're looking at the difference between the two, it's pretty easy to see who contextually in this case is the barbarian, because like you said, Chamberlain was suave, but this actor, he's playing him in a much more probably true to life sort of way, that he's come to this new land with manifest destiny in mind, and reality is smacking him in the face hard.
Yeah.
So Lord Kiyama early on meets with the other lords and says he'll take care of the Blackthorn problem. As this episode unfolds, what we discover is that the Portuguese didn't tell the Japanese about other brands of Christianity, which always, that amazes me. I'm talking about that in something else I'm involved in, about the different brands of Christianity and how it's sold to you and how everybody believes that their brand and their strand is the right one, and which is amazing to me and fascinating to me. But anyway, so Kiyama said he'd take care of them. And it's really funny because they realize that Blackthorn's interest goes against theirs. But then what Toranaga discovers later on is that there are different strains of Christianity, and other Japanese lords didn't understand as well, different strains of Christianity, and also that there's a Portuguese base in Macau. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That employs Japanese Ronin. And so now the English Protestant, dealing with those commercial aspects of Portugal's mission in Japan and with their alliance, it puts Kiyama in danger, and it puts those that don't agree with Portugal's advancing interests in danger as well. And so you really kind of have to read up on that to kind of understand what's going on. And we talked about it last week, but I agree, a narrator is sorely missing here so that we can really understand what's unfolding as they go. But this show so far is really good at mixing the broad stroke themes with the subtle themes. So what it does is it has a physical act that represents the larger macro vision. So in other words, what happens here is that their eyes are being opened to the fact that the world is bigger than they thought it was, quite literally, and that even their faith is more multifaceted, and there are more people that believe different things than they thought what was going on. So now they've got to decide. Everybody's deciding again about Blackthorn, but once they find out that there are wars and trade and strains of faith going on that they weren't aware of, because it made me feel like, how are you dealing with Portugal all this time, and then you find out the whole bunch of stuff that they weren't telling you, stuff that Blackthorn is telling you, which again kind of solidifies his importance, that he's basically a wealth of information to the Japanese lord that they didn't have, but they didn't know they didn't have it.
Well,
Blackthorn.
I think there's one huge piece of information that really, at least for Toranaga, and I think for any Japanese other than the Christian lords who are allied with the Portuguese, took great offense to, which was when he told them about the treaty where they were given to Portugal and that Japan belongs to Portugal. They're like, excuse me?
This really did happen, by the way.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that would lead them to close off their borders, kick out all the whites, and persecute any Christians in Japan for a couple of generations until gunboat diplomacy opened the borders back up.
Yeah.
He's like, you don't own.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that was it. Like, you don't own this, but also the culture shock that might have been to them, because like when in Japan, if you're a Shintoist, if you're a Taoist, if you're a Buddhist, all those mean one thing. All of a sudden you find out there's like 51 flavors of Christianity. You're like, oh geez, like just when we're sort of getting our head wrapped around what the white people are all about, now we find out, like, nope, start all over again.
Yeah.
So Shido did not convert to Catholicism, doesn't have any commercial deals with the Portuguese merchants, but Ishido thinks that Toranaga is going to be dead, but all the other regions other than Ishido himself are Christians.
Right.
And so once they get Toranaga out of the way, which they keep believing is like a done deal, it's just a matter of time, which I also find really, really interesting that, one way or another, eventually you're out of this mix. So the other three lords now have the Portuguese church behind them and their merchants, meaning that they could easily overpower Ishido. What do you guys think about that whole dynamic unfolding?
I would say that it throws a huge wrench into everything, because now, instead of everybody agreeing that Toranaga's the problem and we need to rob him out, you have people waking up to the fact that, okay, our conflict is more than just total control of Japan. We have to think outside of our borders and all the different churches that are now in conflict, and who do we want to support and who do we want to destroy. Mm-hmm. So and you have Ishido's like, okay, even if I kill Toranaga right now, I'm next. I'm the one that's in trouble. They're going to target me. So now it's in his interest to align with Toranaga against the Jesuits and their supporters within Japan, because now it's like you're bringing your holy war into our borders, and now it's a matter of survival. So it's really interesting how political calculations manifest just with when key pieces of information start coming in and changing the dynamic, and and an entirely different culture they didn't know about coming ashore, and starting to influence things.
Politics makes strange bedfellows.
Yep.
I think Ishido is of two thoughts. I mean, yes, I agree with you. They definitely sees the threat from the Christian lords, and the Christian lords are pretty transparent in that they came from an island that was, on the edge of Japan. It wasn't as important as the main islands until the Portuguese arrived, and they set up their trading bases and they converted. And so this trade has given them power that they didn't have before. So they don't want that to go away because they've become much more prominent and important. But I think Yoshida, on the one hand, he sees that threat, but on the other hand, because Toranaga is Minawara, he is the one person who is best set to get rid of the Taiko's son, who is the Regency Council is for, and possibly become Shogun. And right now, Yoshida controls the heir because the heir lives in Osaka, and the heir's mother lives in Osaka. So because he's master of Osaka Castle, he controls them. So it's like he's kind of in this balancing act where he's like, I would love for Toranaga to be gone and all of Japan to rally behind me, but does he really believe that's going to happen? So I don't.
And meanwhile, Toranaga's just sitting there doing his thing, turning everyone else against each other because that's the only way he has to survive. He's a brilliant chess master.
Yeah,
yes, he is.
The option, and this is what makes Blackthorn so powerful, is all this added information he gives him. Like once you find out there's the 51 flavors of Christianity, and now that is no longer a notable quantity, whether the Japanese lords have converted out of a sense of like, okay, I kind of dig this religion, or okay, if it makes us stronger partners with Portuguese, because they this is where they get their firearms technologies, the arquebuses is from Portugal traders. So they've already seen an advantage of trading with the outside. But now all of a sudden, you don't know, well, if other Westerners are going to find their way here, how do we know that the Portuguese faction is the best faction to be with? So it's opened up a whole big can of worms to these folks.
Now we have a new trader to get our guns from, and we're not dependent on these Catholics and the Jesuits and the Portuguese.
Yeah.
And yet all these people who prize knowing your place and keeping the order above all else, the last thing they want is foreign barbarians to bring their wars to their shores. So,
Yeah, but Blackthorn has the muskets, and Blackthorn has the soldiers, and he has the ships, and so you can't wink around that. You can't wink around that, and then he's got the intel. So all of a sudden, he's a powerful ally to whoever allies with him. And what I liked was when the Taiko was dying, he was saying to Toranaga about how I spent my entire life trying to get rid of this internal fighting, trying to quell this internal feuding. And it's like, he's about to breathe his last, and you got to watch over my son because I know the grits are going to hit the pan.
This goes back to episode 1 though, and I meant to ask this question last time because this is one of those conversations that's not in the book. It's kind of hinted there was a conversation, but remember when he asked Toranaga, he says, "If I could give you sole control now, would you take it?" And Toranaga demurs and says he'd rather have the 5 regents. If he had said he wanted sole control, what do you think would have happened? And I'll say, I think the Taiko was testing him and would have killed him right there.
That's what I think would have happened too.
Agreed.
It's a possibility, but I think he was also right, Toranaga, that what want me to make myself a target? That's an honor I don't really. That would be a punishment. Is the way that he put it, and that's exactly right. It would be.
But I think that was the face-saving way of demurring, though. So
it kind of reminds me of Akira Kurosawa's Ran in a way, when the old lord is saying, like, I'm getting up in age, my sons, I want the 3 of you to rule together. And he makes the illustration by having the arrow, and he breaks an arrow easily, a single arrow over his knee. And then he bundles the 3 arrows together, and each of them, neither of them, his sons can't break it. But then, I'm sorry, he didn't break it over his knee. He just snapped it like that. But then the son, who realized it's not going to work, people can't share power. You have to have a singular definitive leader, and other people have to agree to be submissive to that. He took the bundle of arrows and he applied enough force by breaking it over his knees. He said, "See, Father, you're wrong. It won't work." And of course, in the story, it doesn't work. They can't rule together. Somebody has to be in charge and has to have the strength, the will, the character, the charisma to be in charge. But other people have to be willing to accept that as well. Otherwise, you just end up with anarchy.
Okay.
As many shoguns and emperors have found out long before this.
Mm-hmm.
That brings up an interesting point that I did want to talk about, and also that's the same thing Anakin Skywalker said to Padme. But anyway, what you just said, they should be made to. But what I find interesting is, I'll call it leadership qualities, or real leadership qualities are often not appreciated in the moment because, as they said in the episode, the tallest man in the realm is the saddest man in the realm, something like that. I'm not quoting it right, but they basically said that when you stand head and shoulders above the rest, however you do that, get ready for a life of sadness. And I find Toranaga being able to anticipate others' moves, and him saying, if I take that, they'll just kill me faster.
Yeah.
But it's like true leadership means you have to make the tough decisions, and it means you have to take what comes along with those decisions. But the thing I find most interesting, because I've been in this position so many times in my life, is that everybody will be fighting for their own interest and ignoring the fact that you have to look out for the whole thing. One of my best examples of that is being a teacher and being a camp counselor. I found out being a camp counselor that when I'm out there with my little group of boys, I have to deal with everybody. We got to feed everybody. Everybody's got to have fun. We got to stay engaged. When I'm dealing with the parents, they just talk about their child. And I found the same thing out being a choir leader, that I have to deal with the whole group. I have to deal with who's singing, who's not, who's at different levels of talent, who's invested or not. When I'm dealing with the parents, they just talking about their child. You ain't paying my child enough attention. My child's not happy. This is not happening. That's not happening. And that's shown up true in a classroom. Especially if you have an oversized classroom, which, they're not really supposed to give us more. You really need like 12 students, and now they, give you like 3 times as many. But the point I'm trying to make is that everybody's always only ever talking about their interests, their agenda, their goal, and they talk about it in isolation. But when you're the leader, you have to take a step back and see you have to see the big picture. You got to see how everybody's going to play out in this thing. And those qualities are not appreciated when you exercise them. What people want to do is curry your favor and get you over on their side to agree with what they're doing and cut out everybody else.
It's interesting you see that, because you see another guy with ambition who thinks he's playing everybody, and he's just coming off as a fool in Yabushigi. You know, this idiot is stepping around doing all sorts of stuff, and you know, just everything he does is just making his problems even worse. You know,
Yeah, you know it's going to hammer him.
yeah.
Well, if you stay on Twitter for more than 5 minutes, you will discover that you will get accused of things that have never entered your mind because of somebody else's beefs. And I'm like, if we're looking at the long-term future of Japan, and if we're looking at building relationships with now discovering that the world is bigger than you thought it was, and if you're looking at aligning with those that have the same faith beliefs as you, but also the commercial advantages thereof, you have to have macro vision to pull any of that off.
It's because you have these feudal lords, these regents, and they have such devotion within, you know, their own structure, their own hierarchy, with some exceptions. You know, like for instance, like you know, the boss man's stuck in Osaka, he's gonna get his head cut off. Like, all right, tell you what, let's get all the guns and the cannons off this ship. We'll go hide that because I'm gonna become my own little region, my own little area. You know, like I won't be under him anymore. But he's still got a number of loyal retainers who keep that sort of behavior in check. And if you could have that from the top down, then it would be successful. But that's people thinking beyond themselves, thinking about the good of all versus like, what can I get out of it?
Well, I agree with what you said before. It's pretty much impossible for there to be joint rule with people.
Yeah.
You have to have a clear leader. But also what I can understand, and I'm going to throw this out to you guys, this is a common theme and a common thread. Why can't the Japanese lords in the different regions see they have the same problem as the Sith? You're trying to accumulate power, but whoever you eliminate, that means you're next. If you're going to turn on someone else to get them out the picture, what in the world make you think them other regions ain't going to turn on you?
Yeah, the other guys are going to ally. It's like, okay, he took
because and that's the fact of life for them, is that they're always under that threat, you know. But what shows it? You know, it's Shogun, where it's like, what is the one instance where it's acceptable to betray your lord? Well, when you win, you know. So you know. I
mean, Blackthorn even says it, unless I win. Yeah.
And then so I mean, it's interesting. I will say also though that it's one of those things. It's like the same way in the corporate world when you're working. It's like you're all supposed to be working towards the same goal, but if you are content to sit still and do your job well without trying to advance yourself, then you never advance. In fact, a lot of times you end up getting replaced. You know, and it is one of the things that was very frustrating for me coming out of the military, where you train your replacement and then advancement comes, you know, it just comes, you know, until you get to a certain rank or you get out. So, it's one of those weird things where when you're in the corporate world, you're always trying to advance yourself at the expense of others while trying to work with them to advance a common goal. And those things don't really marry up well. So
Vader was trying to turn his son Luke to ally with him to overthrow the Emperor, and then the Emperor ended up tempting Luke and say, "Strike your father down and take his place by my side." That's what I mean by the Sith problem. You know, always two there are, a master and an apprentice. That means somebody got to die when we graduate, right?
I will say Toranaga seems to be aware of that. Nobody else seems to be, but I think Toranaga is.
Yeah, he's definitely a man of like a vision and wisdom, because we see it time and time again in history. China had the same issue. You know, while Japan was going through its warring states, China had its three kingdoms, and in order to stop the constant wars between all these neighboring states within the country, if you look at the film Hero with Jet Li, that's based on the factual history of one guy said, like, okay, I'm sick and tired of this shit. I'm going to knock everybody down until we just have a unified nation. And if I have to rule with an iron fist as a tyrant to put an end to the wars, that's what I do.
Yeah.
You see that again with like Leto Atreides in Dune. He becomes the God Emperor, the tyrant. He gives them 1,000 years of peace, and they hate him for it.
But it's interesting to bring up Dune because Duke Atreides, Leto, when he came to power, the first Leto Atreides, he let the Emperor do to him what Toranaga didn't let the Tycho do to him. He let him the Emperor put him front and center for everybody to hate him and then eventually take him away. Whereas Toranaga was smart enough to see that trap and not get caught in it, So
yeah, he did kind of Ned Stark himself.
Yeah. Well, there's another one for you. Ned Stark though is honorable stupid. That's his official alignment. So
lawful stupid, yeah.
Yeah.
Honorable stupid. That's great, and that's on point. So when I look at Toranaga, but particularly in this episode, I see that while his manner, he always presents himself as kind, and I don't mean to offend. While he's doing that, he's slowly sending signals to his enemies. I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing. You think I don't know what you're doing, but I know what you're doing. I see what you're doing. And I kind of found that brilliant. I was kind of like, because he's always got that quiet rage on his face. He's always got that look on his face like he's 2 seconds from snapping, but he doesn't snap in that way. Yeah. What he does is after he finds out about how the Portuguese think they own Japan and that there's a secret base with disgraced samurai warriors on there, he refuses to sign the document that allows one of the major ships to leave. And he's sending the message to the other lords in the other region is that you see how dangerous Blackthorn is if he's on my side. So I'm gonna do everything I can to make sure he's on my side. He's an ally. He's a weapon. He's a resource for me now. But I'm not gonna show you that in a blatant, loud kind of way. I'm just gonna show you why this man is key and why I'm keen on both keeping him alive and allying with him and that kind of stuff. Kind of in your face, kind of subtle kind of way. And I was like, oh, dang.
Plus, I love it because he says that they need to have the rudders and everything translated so they know the truth. But he knows the truth. He's already discerned what it is. And he's telling the Portuguese without telling them that he's like, I know that you know that I know.
Yeah, I planted my daughter with you for 14 years to learn your language so I can find out everything you're not telling me. And then, she tells him everything that they're not telling him. And now it's like, now the shoe's on the other foot. And now I'm in charge of this relationship now. And you guys had better fall in line or else.
I mean, I love the brilliant subtlety of this character. He's so slick. When we get introduced to him at court, when it's the 4 other regions against him in the first episode, and they're making, for what in the Japanese culture, and it's no wonder his retainer loses his shit because he is really just, calling him a traitor and a liar and a dog and all this stuff to his face, and he plays it so cool. It's like, she's no more a prisoner of my house than I'm a prisoner here. He's always making these deferential statements. He is just chef's kiss brilliance at court politics and watching this guy make maneuvers.
And he's very patient.
Yes.
He's extremely patient. He knows how to bide his time, use everything to his advantage, and keep a low profile until that moment, and then he strikes like a viper.
Yeah, and not only that, in that one scene that you're talking about from episode 1, Jeff, I mean, it's really harsh to us as Westerners that the father and the infant were killed. But what choice did he have in that society? Because his other choice is to not do that and let Ashido be offended. And then Ashido then has cause to take it out on Toranaga,
Right.
So it's like Steve said, he's got patience. You almost believe that he's read Sun Tzu, where he's like, I'm not going to commit myself to battle till I know I'm going to win. Yeah,
he may have. They do. He does talk about supreme, excellent warfare without fighting.
He understood that, and more importantly, once he chastised him, his retainer understood that, and he took the fall for it, and he made such an egregious apology. I mean, that's why he offered to even end his line, knowing how devastating that was going to be to his wife, and how devastating that would be to you as somebody of a long line of samurai. Like, I'm ending my line, but it's the only way to save my daimyo. It's the only way, because I have created such an egregious faux pas. If I don't, they're just going to annihilate our entire clan.
But this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, which is the things that they have taken out, you know, which is a lot of the stuff with the priest and in this episode, the priest in the prison and everything. But the things they've added in, for instance, that scene, that all happened months before the actual Shogun book starts. But by putting that in there, I think they've advanced the story, and they've definitely advanced Toranaga's character arc. So I think it's good writing. So, and
I know, like, adaptations from one media to another, there's always got to be some sort of things going on. But if you've got really good writers who understand the material, I'm not opposed to them adding stuff like this, like adding this greater context. I was just watching lately. I've been watching some in-depth studies of Game of Thrones, the show, and talking the difference between the show and the books. And there's a point where Lindelof and the other guy, they created a scene out of whole cloth where Cersei is having this conversation with Robert Baratheon. And it's a beautiful insight into how both the characters work. And you're seeing how trapped they are in this toxic relationship and this toxic rulership of the country. And that wasn't in the books. Now you get the implication of it, but the writers were smart enough to pick up on that, and maybe even, you know, went to George and was able to ask him a few things. And they created a wonderful scene because they were just really good at, like, finding those little nuggets in the material and extending it outward.
Well, the biggest difference between Game of Thrones, the book, and the series is that the series ended for good or bad, and the book series is never going to end. So there it is.
Yeah, I have a feeling that Shogun will end up being better than it for that, because it does definitely seem to say, okay, we're going to end with the book. We're going to end where the book ends. And we know how to manage the material. You know, we're going to go and pace it accordingly.
I mean, so far, my only criticism, like, and you guys have mentioned, is if you don't know the material ahead of time, and for people who aren't immersed in, you know, to understanding that particular culture and that time in history, it does need some more exposition.
Yep.
Yeah, that's funny, asking for more exposition, because normally we hate exposition, but it's definitely necessary here. Okay, I'm going to throw this out, and then I want to talk about this last thing before we wrap up. The thing I'm going to throw out is that Mariko is who Deanna Troi should have been.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
If Deanna had been a master of language like Uhura was, and if Deanna had been a full telepath instead of just an emotional telepath, whatever in the heck that means, I can sense their feelings. Yeah, okay.
Empathy.
If Deanna had been a master of language, and if Deanna had been a full Betazoid telepath, she's Picard's greatest weapon, and she has justification as a character, because she existed to show how sexy Marina was, and all the other stuff is just like secondary to that. But as I experience Mariko, I'm like, this is who Deanna was supposed to be. Someone who knows what's going on, someone who's like Uhura, because Uhura always surprised everybody, even in the J.J. Abrams version, with her mastery of languages and what that meant in any kind of situation if you have someone that understands what's going on from any type of foreign agent. But if Deanna had been that way and been presented that way, instead of just, just being a sexy foil for Riker and whoever else, then her character would have been much more justified. And I think that's why I like Mariko the most, because her character is quite justified, quite intelligent, quite understanding what's going on. But I'm like, this is what would have made Troy a true weapon. You wouldn't be able to beat Picard if he had a master linguist and a telepath at his side. How could you beat that? So I think it's another one of those things where I often say, sometimes we get the best versions of our favorite characters from other sources. This is the best version of Deanna Troy as far as I'm concerned, is Miracle. Just like I've always said that the best Batman we've ever gotten was Jason Bourne, but that's another conversation. Okay, so here's what I want to throw out, and here's what I kind of want to end on. We talked a little bit about the assassin, and we talked a little bit, and once again, how Toranaga announced where a Blackthorn was going to be in the palace, and that was just to flush out, do we have spies? Do we have, anybody inside the camp that's leaking information? How am I going to flush that out? Well, I'll just leak where the prisoner's being held and see what happens, and then I will wisely, switch places and be able to deal with them, whatever, which once again was just a brilliant stroke. And you can see how this dude is playing 5-dimensional chess. That he's way ahead of what everybody's thinking. And while everybody else is letting their smaller vision or their emotions guide them, he's like, no, there's a bigger picture here, and I'm going to play on that. But what I wanted to talk about was, we mentioned it briefly, was how much of a role do you think offense or being offensive should play in society? And the reason I ask that question is because if you're going to make a difference, if you're going to be a leader, if you're going to do something different, if you're going to do anything people haven't seen before, some people are going to be offended. If you want to make a change of any kind, some people are going to be offended. But as we talked about just a few moments ago, there are rules to your society and the way it functions. And sometimes to save face, or sometimes to prevent a greater tragedy, or sometimes if you have to take out the few to preserve the life of the many, sometimes that's what you have to do. So my question to you guys is, how much of a role do you think being offensive or being offended should play in a society? Because that's what has been played on American pop culture for the past 10 years now, is we've shifted the conversation from rational discussion and facts to emotion, which is completely subjective. And this is wrong because it offends me. And you have to accept everything that I'm saying, or else I'll be offended and I'll just call you names. So I want to hear you guys take about how much of a role do you think that should play in any societal situation? Start with Steve.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I will start with Orwell, because I think that he has the right sort of mindset about this, which is sometimes telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And I would say that definitely applies when we're talking about cultural things. Sometimes there are just things that have to be said, whether or not, culture allows for it. And you need to have the right person in the right place at the right time be able to say those things. And I think that's what Blackthorn is, in a way. Like, he can say all the things that Toranaga can't. And sometimes putting somebody like that in the position to tell those kinds of truths is important. And I think that that's kind of like part of the reason why these two end up coming together. It's like, yeah, this guy is the guy that everybody hates, so he can say all these things and he can shake everything up. And meanwhile, Toranaga can stand in the background, try to bring everything together in the way that benefits him. So I think it's absolutely brilliant what Toranaga is doing from that perspective. And yeah, there are things that, sometimes a leader has to say, even if they're in politics as well. And you're going to make enemies no matter what, really, if you're in a position like that, because you have the power and they don't. And, you have the power everybody's trying to gain. So if you're sitting on power, you're just going to end up making, offending people just by having that position and making the decisions that you're making. So, I mean, a lot of it is just like, but what is it going to be? Is it going to do the most good? That's the question. Like, is it going to advance the vision that you have the best way to do it this way or not? And so it's a complex question, but I think, there are some things to consider with that.
Bracy.
One thing that this particular question speaks to me and thinking about in terms of the show, there's a great deal I admire about a number of different cultures, especially cultures in these periods, these medieval periods. there's so much I appreciate about the Japanese, because they tried to turn every single thing they did into a form of art, but they took it to such an extreme where etiquette becomes not just an art form, but it also is bound up in your own honor, and the honor for you, the honor for your family, the honor for your household. And so the needing of having to save face and no real flexibility there. Well, in the first episode, we see the result of that. A man has to kill himself and his own child. And so it becomes a trap when offense, and we think things like that might not be able to happen again. Well, if they've happened before, they can certainly happen again. History can repeat if you don't learn the lessons from history. And it seems like we are heading for such a trajectory where we see people getting canceled for things that they did decades ago. And of a particularly, something I find particularly grossly offensive is the fact that you can't even tell jokes. I am a longtime lover of stand-up comedy, and I've loved the work. I dearly love if we could have George Carlin and Richard Pryor back, and we've still got some people like Bill Burr and Dave Chappelle kind of fighting a good fight, even though all of those people were more or less pretty super liberal. And so I don't have anything in common with them like that. But damn it, I want to hear them speak truth to power, even if I don't always agree with it. Because if everything becomes offensive, then we're trapped. Once again, we're as trapped as the people in Shogun are trapped. It's like you walk around in eggshells. You have to be so particular about saying the wrong thing. Now, you might not be forced to commit seppuku. You might not have your clan wiped out, but you will be ostracized. You will be kicked out of the public square, which is here in the digital platform these days. And that's almost as bad, because now your voice no longer matters. So, taking offense to the extreme, I cannot agree with. And, got to be able to offend, because it's impossible not to offend somebody somewhere, somehow. So if we can't express those ideas, and then you can't give me your feedback, then there's no freedom of speech. And we see how deadly in the context of the show that is. That one misstep in etiquette can end the life of a character,
or their bloodline,
or their entire bloodline. I mean, that's even harsher, knowing that reasonably a parent wants to see their child succeed them. And the most tragic thing is knowing that, like, it just stops right here. Everything stops, because as beings who are mortal, the next generation is our legacy.
That's right. Nims.
I'm going to take a little bit different tack. I'm going to look at it from the Toranaga approach, the macro approach, but apply it to our modern society, and something that I really am upset about looking back in time, but I think it's a good example. I think taking offense to the extreme, or being offended to the extreme, labels you as a chaos element, which is dangerous and good at the same time. It can be good, it can be dangerous. Blackthorn is a chaos element that has been thrown in and is upsetting the apple cart here. I'm not saying that Blackthorn is this, but a chaos element of American society was the attack on 9/11. Suddenly, things that were offensive to us as Americans in American society were reasonable because of a chaos element. And so I think that as a leader, or in our society, people are always looking for those stressors and where the boundaries are. And then they look to take advantage of offense or offenses and chaos elements in order to push that when it's acceptable. And in this case, the Patriot Act, which would have been offensive to Americans just 2 months before 9/11, suddenly was wholly acceptable because something more offensive came in. And I think this is about that patience. Now, I don't like that the people that wanted to do this in the first place were able to do it, but they were patient. There were a lot of people that wanted an increased security state and everything, but time wasn't ripe, And this is a quote I put at the beginning of my novel. You wait for the time to be right. You create a thing, and then you wait for the time to be ripe, and then you pounce. And I think that's what Toranaga is doing, is that he's waiting. And I think that you see examples of that going on all over the world and in corporations and everywhere else all the time. And I think that's one example of fairly recent American history, is that if you had tried to implement the Patriot Act in 1996 under Bill Clinton, people would have threatened to impeach him over that. You know, Democrats might have impeached him over that. And yet along comes a Republican and is allowed to do it because of a chaos element, something that was so offensive that it opened up an opportunity. And so I guess that's my way of saying how you can apply Sun Tzu on a macro scale to nations and corporations and stuff, is that you push the boundaries with offense or being offended to see where they are, and then you wait. And if you're given an opportunity and this is the way you want to be, when time is right, you got to pounce. You know, and it's like that for everyone.
Dune is the same way. Like a lot of you see a lot of stuff that was established by the Bene Gesserit, you know, was establishing the prophecies and all these sorts of things. And then you bring in a chaos element like Lady Jessica, who didn't go along with the program, had a son, and now suddenly you have the Messiah, and then that completely changes everything.
And this could be actually for good or bad. I mean, you look at the civil rights movement of the 1960s. That was a chaotic time. But things that were offensive to American society in the 50s were suddenly acceptable, and not only acceptable, moral to do in the 60s. You know, so, you know, it's always this trade-off. You know, it's nice to put things in black and white. Unfortunately, it's not always that way. It's more transactional. And then depending on what our own morality and our judgment is, we put black or white values on it. So.
Now, I agree with that last statement, that there's always trade-offs in life because life is pretty much set up that way. And so you have to understand you're always trading one thing for the other. But it's that last part that's the manipulation, that once you make the trade, then you say, well, everybody that agrees with the trade is right. You're obviously right, and you're the good people. And then everybody else is the other.
Yeah. And plus, you see this all the time in society. Once things stabilize, it doesn't matter how bad something is. Once people get used to it, it's really hard to get rid of it. You know, so
was it Lance was saying when we were doing our review of Office Space, it's hard to unwash your brain.
Yeah. So I mean that it's a little bit different answer than what everybody else get, but I think it's the same concept, just on a much larger scale. And I think that's the scale that Toranaga is thinking on. So, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's why Toranaga is so much better than everybody who's against him, because they are all so focused on themselves as an individual, that individual route for power. Yeah. But he really is the one guy who is trying to, like, how can I get my country on the other side of this and make it the best country possible? He's thinking of the million over the few.
And that's why I've always said, it's like I am perfectly content in my fairly normal life, because once you get to that scale, you're making what I consider to be almost amoral choices sometimes, or immoral choices, but sometimes you're not left with a good choice, you know, and you're maneuvering people in a Machiavellian type way. So
you've been a military commander. You understand there are times when you people in harm's way, and there's even times when you've got to send men off to their deaths.
Yeah, but I was going to say, to that point, I was going to say, from my point of view, it's fighting the way life works, which is not personal to you. A lot of people take the wrong things personally, as if gravity was personal to you, as if you're the only one affected by it, but that's not true.
I'm 52 years old, and it took me a majority of my life to understand that it's not about me. So, you know.
Well, I think we all have to grow into that, but that's only if you grow into it, because we know that everybody doesn't. But what I mean is that life requires sacrifice. For something to live, something else has to die. You can see that with seeds. That's what seeds are. Seeds can't stay like they are if we want the life in them. They have to die to that form to become something else. And life is pretty much set up that way. So, like I said, what I find fascinating is that last thing you said about how we shift our morals then once we've established a trade-off. Once we've decided we're going to trade this for that, then we just rewrite the moral code, which is what always gets on my nerves. But anyway, so, I've lived long enough to see that happen several times. Mm-hmm. And so, so from Tornado's point of view,
chances are you will see it several more times before you leave this earth. So.
Absolutely. And at this point in my life, to me, it's just people fighting against the way life works, trying to have what you want, but you think you don't have to pay for that in blood. Yes, you do. Yes, it doesn't matter what you want. If what you want is good or evil, or however you define that, moral or immoral, something got to bleed and something got to die to make it come forth. That is how life itself works. That's not particular to you. So I think Tornaga has enough of a grasp of that, and he's willing to sacrifice what he needs to get the bigger picture going. And I think most of his enemies just want to take him out, and they just want to take out anybody that might disagree and stop them from their ascension to power, which is why I can't understand why they don't get.
Well, it's so
short out, then y'all just going to turn on each other and take each other out. Why can't you see that?
It's so short-sighted. What makes you think like, oh, okay, if I can knock out Toranaga, and then, well, the three who are left gang up against me, then I'm facing the same thing he has, just I have slightly less terrible odds because now it's 3-1 instead of 4-1, but it's incredibly short-sighted.
I think it's, without getting too philosophical, and I know we're out of time, but I mean, I think a lot of it also comes into this Eastern philosophy of effortless effort and sitting back and letting it flow, letting the situation flow until you find the right time to move into that flow and take advantage,
That's in space.
That's Toranaga.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Aikido and Hapkido too, using that motion, the motion and energy of your enemy against them, and not having to exert too much yourself, but just letting them.
I've learned a little bit to learn that I know nothing, as Socrates would say. So.
I drank what?
All right. Well, I want to thank my co-hosts for this incredible discussion over these episodes. I love the macro themes and the micro themes in this show and how they're woven together almost seamlessly, but still clearly. You can see the broad strokes, but you can see the subtle strokes underneath, and it's all happening all at the same time, which I think is great. And it's kind of rare we get writing this good on that many levels.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, given how a lot of shows and adaptations of books we've watched in the past several years of us together have been like it's so thrilling to see an adaptation that's so doggone good, man.
Can you imagine?
I think it's Sonata fighting for it.
Can you imagine if they had done as good a job adapting a Wheel of Time the way that they did this?
Yes. I still have not forgiven Amazon for doing that series dirty. Still haven't.
Sorry to bring that up again, Steve. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's too bad because we saw moments of glorious potential and then it was just pissed away.
And then season 2, they just didn't bother. It's like, we're just going to do our thing. We're not even going to bother to care about what's going on in the book.
Shogun, and it's like they put the money into all the right things. They put the right people in the right places. It has the sumptuous visuals of like the Rings of Power, but it's top tier writing and acting on top of it all. And I'm engrossed in it in a way I haven't been in episodic TV in a while.
But there's something about the Japanese cast and what they've fought for to do here, because the way emotions are reflected is different, so it's good. It's very
they
good.
start off the first episode. They were talking about the 3 faces, the 3 things you show.
Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah, your 3 hearts. Yeah,
the 3 hearts were the very mask-like faces. Japanese are not expressive on purpose, and it's because of that etiquette system of like losing face, because that can be a weaponized element against you. And so
and once again,
hard.
This was a thing that was not in the 1980s series. People were laughing and people were being jovial, and it was like, I appreciate it for what it was, but this feels authentic. It's good.
The only people you get to see be real are the peasantry, the people who are not there present at court. And you see the same thing if you watch Akira Kurosawa.
And the Europeans.
His characters who are out there just like living the normal life, they got the hustle, they got the struggle. They don't have to worry about all that crap, and they can be real. They can be genuine. They don't have. I imagine it must have been so exhausting to be a samurai or any sort of aristocrat in that society, constantly watching policing your every move, your every action, your every spoken word.
Yeah.
So last thing I'll say is to all the creatives out there who are watching this, you have to fight for this level of quality. They fought to get this cast. They fought for those locations, just like Richard Donner fought for the first Superman movie. Then they fired him because they wanted something more goofy. But he gave us, probably the best representation of Superman we've had in our lifetimes. Well, if you're creative, you're going to have to fight for stuff on this level, because normally the powers that be don't respect or understand on this level. So the writers and the actors and the directors have to do their jobs to the max to produce this level of quality. So just don't be discouraged when you see that.
It's worth fighting for.
It's definitely worth fighting for, because the product will definitely be the better for your fighting for it. All right. I want to thank my co-host. Thank you so much, Nims. Thank you so much, Steve.
Glad to be here. And again, it's really nice to be talking about something that we actually enjoy, especially compared to some of the stuff that we've covered in previous years. It's really refreshing.
Yeah, I don't need no more Harley Quinn. Thank you so much, Brayson.
Shimash.
Yeah, we don't see Harley no more. I'll be fine. All right. Thanks to everybody who watched us. Don't forget to check out our other content on United Capes Podcast Network and on Comics Crusaders. I just dropped an interview with a comic about college slackers in 1993. So we literally have something for everybody on these channels: creatives, retro stuff, up and coming artists, new comics, some of everything. So we are happy to bring that to you. So don't forget to like and subscribe and share these videos. And me and this crew will see you next time on the next episode of Sloppy Spoilers.